Hello, welcome back. I hope you are well. For this particular lecture, we will continue a conversation on the Hindu traditions, and we're going to focus on two interrelated themes: Bhakti, art, devotion, and temples, and then deities a little bit. So I'm going to introduce these three themes over the next 15 minutes or so. Let's get started. Let me share my screen with you. There we go. And so, yeah, Bhakti devotion, temples and deities. All right. So let's see. Let's get things rolling here. And so, first, it should be stated, if I haven't stated it yet, that Hinduism, or Hindus view their ways of life not as a religion, but simply as a way of life. Hinduism really focuses on, rather than say beliefs, focuses on practices, rituals, and art as being important parts of this way of life. So usually Hindus know little of the sacred text, such as the Vedas, because that's kind of reserved largely for the Brahmins, for the priestly varna. Um, are the beliefs or philosophies. They might not know a lot about the different philosophies and beliefs, which we'll talk about some of the philosophy as we progress and kind of conclude our time on the Hindu tradition. But really, what kind of your typical Hindu person knows in terms of their way of life or religion, as it were, is they know certain traditions or holidays and practices, and those really inform what it means for them to be a Hindu. So performances from music to dance to drama enactments of the devotional poetry. Recall we saw some images of like a reenactment, a play of the Ramayana, for example. These are all important rituals and enactments and ways by which the Hindus participate within their tradition and coming to understand their stories. And so, connected to that, bhakti, which means devotion, is an important part of the Hindu way of life. Recall with me that we talked about the three ways of liberation when we talked about the Bhagavad Gita. And one of the ways of liberation was devotion or bhakti. And so you have two kind of parts of India, the north and the south, which, in terms of devotion, are kind of on different historical trajectories. So you have in the northern part of the Indian subcontinent, there's more focus on the Vedic tradition and classical Hinduism. So more focus on reading the Vedas, the ancient sacred text. But if you go south, from about 400 before the Common Era, you have this flourishing of cultural life, which is informed by this emergent kind of spiritual life around devotion, our bhakti. So, with that flowering of this new kind of spiritual life of devotion, you get literature that's connected to it. This literature, notably, is written in the Tamil language, which is the language of the people. So, it's not in Sanskrit, or it's not in some kind of like sacred language that maybe only the elite are familiar with, but it's written in the language of the people some 2,000 years ago. And so you have poems on a range of themes, right? But these themes, such as your secular themes, from outer world to warfare to honor, and then there's the inner world themes of love and romance. Like all these themes are used or transformed to be used to do bhakti, to do devotion. So in the Bhakti movement, which begins in South India from about 400 before the 400 BCE, before the Common Era, the Bhakti movement, you have these poetic devotees. They're poets and they're religious devotees of both Vishnu and Shiva, two important gods within the Hindu tradition, who we're going to talk about today in this lecture. So you have devotees to Vishnu and Shiva who begin singing the praises of their deities, not in the formal Sanskrit, right, that kind of religious formal language, but in the everyday language of Tamil, the mother tongue of the people. And it's this language of intimacy and of power and emotion, and it's representative of the shift within the Indian subcontinent that is part of the Bhakti movement. So it's a shift towards devotion being central to the Hindu way of life. And you see that expressed. You see devotion expressed in a variety of ways within the Hindu culture. So here, for example, are young dakis or drummers performing during a Durga Puja. And a puja is like a worship festival in India. Or here you have a Hindu priest doing bhakti, performing at a Ganga Arti ritual. It's a fire puja in the sacred city of Varanasi. And so connected to devotion, you get the emergence of temples, because temples become sacred sites for pilgrimage, and you can make a pilgrimage as a way to express bhakti, as a way to express devotion. Of note, temples are not mentioned in the earliest Vedas, in part because the emphasis in those earliest Vedas is on ritual and sacrifice, right? But temples get mentioned later on. So in South India, temples are constructed by the 5th century Common Era. So the Hindu tradition, as it's an ancient tradition that extends far back, right? And so this is relatively late for the emergence of temples in the Hindu tradition. In North India, unfortunately, temples were destroyed by invaders or by Muslim rulers. So that's one form of devotion. We also have indicators of bhakti and devotion in the cave carvings, where you have carvings of Vishnu, a Hindu god, and you have icons of Shiva, another important Hindu god, which suggests there was worship in these shrines to these two gods by the 5th century Common Era. It's understood within the Hindu tradition that these temples have a correlation to the universe and to the body of divine beings. In South India, where Bhakti flourished, it's believed that a single glimpse of a temple tower could be enough to destroy one's sins. So there's power in visiting the temple. There's power in even seeing the temple. So you have a flourishing of deities during the Gupta period, which runs from 319 to 467 Common Era. So you have the Puranas, which were written between 300 before Common Era and 1000 Common Era. The Puranas retold old tales of the Hindu tradition, shifting from major Vedic gods and goddesses to other deities. So it's in this context of the Gupta period, we have a shift from these older ancient gods, which we're not going to spend time talking about because they're not relevant. Contemporary Hinduism they haven't been relevant for hundreds of years, really. And they're not relevant because of the shift that occurs during the Gupta period, from those major gods talked about in the Vedas to other goddesses and deities. And what emerges are 3 prominent deities that remain prominent deities in the Hindu tradition up to the present day. They emerged during the Gupta period, and those 3 deities are Vishnu, Shiva, and Shiva's consort, known as Parvati, are by other names. It's the female goddess. And so you have these groups, these traditions of devotion that are focused on Vishnu, who are known as Vaishnavas. You have others who focus on Shiva, who are known as Shaivas. And then finally, you have others focused on Parvati, the goddess, who are known as Shaktas. So these 3 kind of traditions are formed around the devotion to one of these 3 respective gods or goddesses. And so again, this is in the Gupta period. So that's again about 400, 500 Common Era. You get this pivot towards these being 3 gods that garner a lot of devotion, and they remain up to the present moment within the Hindu traditions important gods of devotion. They first emerged during the Gupta period. And during the Gupta period, you get the construction of temples. So here you have a rock temple cave. It's from the old Gupta period in India. This is the Hindu temple. This is Elephant Island caves near Mumbai or Bombay in India. And this too comes out of the Gupta period, this period of that flourishing of devotion and a shift towards the three gods we mentioned. So in terms of deities in the Hindu tradition, there's many deities. Then some deities have avatars, which we've talked about some and we'll return to again. But above all these deities, in all their multiplicity in beauty, you have the Brahman. And so the Brahman is the highest principle. It's the transcendent principle. It's the immanent principle that creates. It's unchanging. It's really the one ultimate God that is above all these other gods. So yeah, in the Hindu tradition is in some ways really polytheistic, because we have all these different gods that receive devotion. But in some ways, you could argue it's almost monotheistic, because above all these gods is the ultimate God, the Brahman, and the Brahman holds all things together. Indeed, one way to understand the Brahman is that our souls, our Atmans, are like drops of water, right, that are subsumed within the Brahman. And so each of us are kind of held up or within the Brahman, this highest principle. But below that, right, below the Brahman who is beyond our reach, right? And so in some ways, like beyond our devotion, right? So you have these gods that are below Brahman that become become gods that receive a lot of devotion, such as the gods Vishnu, for example, such as Vishnu. So we've talked about Vishnu a little bit. Vishnu is an important deity within the Hindu tradition and receives a lot of devotion. And so this, for example, here is 3 of 21 towers or gopurams, which are part of a Vishnu temple, a temple that is devoted to creating space for pilgrimage and space for bhakti devotion within India. And so we talked about Vishnu a little bit, but just a little bit more to kind of wrap up our time on Vishnu. To reiterate, there's 10 incarnations of Vishnu in the present cycle. 9 have occurred. The 10th is expected at the end of this age. You have different you have different ways in which Vishnu has been depicted across material culture. So you have carvings in caves that depict Vishnu's second and third incarnations, which are the tortoise and the boar, who saves the earth goddess Bu, so this ancient goddess Bu from the earlier tradition. The 7th incarnation was Rama. We talked about Rama. We've talked about the Hindu epic, the Ramayana. In some narratives, the 9th was Krishna from the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is often accompanied by his consort Sri or Lakshmi, who's the goddess of good fortune. And that's what we have on the right over here as in Lakshmi, often you see Lakshmi displayed like in Hindu homes and within stores as well. So Vishnu, you know what we're going to do? I think what I want to do is stop here. Let me get through Vishnu, then we're going to pick it up. We're going to make this 2 lectures on Hindu deities and bhakti devotion and temples. So just wrapping up Vishnu, then we'll pick it up next lecture. So Vishnu, the first avatar of Vishnu, remember there's been 9 avatars of Vishnu. The first avatar was a fish. The fish is known as Matsavatar. And so the story is that Vishnu appears as a fish who saves Manu, the first man, so to speak. And remember, we talked about the laws of Manu. And the story is retold in the Vedas. And so while bathing in the lake, Manu finds a small fish in his hand, and the fish asks him to put him in a jar at home. The next day, the fish expanded to fill the jar. So Manu ends up putting the fish in the lake, and the fish outgrows the lake, and then into a river, which the fish outgrows, and then into the ocean. The fish tells Manu a great flood is coming and to build a boat for his family, the 7 sages, and the seeds of all the animals. And so as the flood sweeps through the earth, those on the ship survive. So this is a famous type of like flood story. And you have flood stories across cultures and religious traditions, such as within the Hebrew tradition or Jewish tradition. In the first book of their Bible in Genesis, there's that flood story. So this is one of the manifestations or avatars of Vishnu, which is an important story and for important flood story that within the Hindu tradition. The story of a huge boar, again, which is an incarnation of the god Vishnu, is captured here in cave number 5, these caves which come out of that Gupta period that we have been talking about. So next lecture, we're going to continue our conversation on deities by talking about Lord Shiva and then talking about the goddess and then kind of wrapping it up. But let's stop there for now and we'll continue the conversation on Hindu deities next time around. All right, take care and see you soon.